Hey everybody, hope you're having a great day. Mike, I'm so excited about what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm hearing so many cool stories of what God's doing in churches. And we're coming out of the whole crazy COVID thing, right? And God's touching people in such neat ways. And then here in Texas, man, we're all pumped up because Texas A&M is in the midst of revival. They just had a 7-hour service at Texas A&M, and people were repenting. There were healings in the service. And there were people praying for a fresh boldness to be the church that God needs in this generation. So how cool is it that all that's going on? And then this is going to bless the Significant Church family, especially those who were at the retreat. Yeah. And this is from Kelly, who, if you remember, Alan, it was a pretty bold thing, right? Whenever he looked at her, and I don't know how old she was, maybe in her 20s would be my guess. But God gave him a word that she was sick, and then he called out cancer. She had cancer, and we were all like totally shocked. Well, anyway, she sent this to Tamara, my wife, and she said, "Hi, Tamara, this is Kelly Huffman from the Significant Church Conference in Austin. Hope you and your beautiful family are doing well. I want to share a praise report with you. I had surgery yesterday. The doctors removed 2 large cysts, and they said I'm now cancer-free. Thank you, Jesus, and thank you for prayers and support. Our family is very blessed by the conference in so many ways. Let's stay in touch." And what a powerful thing. I mean, here's this girl never dreamed she'd have the diagnosis she had, and God did a miracle in her life. Awesome. So that's really awesome.
Yeah, exciting time. I mean, I know we've been through a crazy few years with COVID and everything, and now to see just what's going on the backside of that. I don't know about you, but I'm excited to be in God's team, to be part of ministry.
Yeah, well, I mean, God's people are praying, and the church has been so strong. We talked about this again in conference, but they do a survey every 10 years in the United States, and they look at what kind of faith communities people are part of. And in 2010, there were 12,200,000 people in non-denominational churches. 2020 is now 21 million people. So we can't just listen to what the news media is talking about. God's on the move.
That's right.
And I look at this as if God's answering the prayers of his people. And so I'm just excited to be a part. And I'm excited about today. We've got a great guest with us. You want to tell everybody about it?
Yeah, we have Pastor Cody Jones from Tree of Life in New Braunfels, Texas. Man, he's been a friend of ours, a friend of the network, and a friend of ours personally for a long time. And he's the worship and creative pastor there at Tree of Life. And man, we're going to be talking about preparing for Easter, which is a timely topic because I'm sure he is in the middle of that as we speak. And man, it's just been such a blessing to watch him. I remember when he and I were kind of the young guys. We kind of came up around the same time. I think I'm a few years older than him, but we were kind of the young guns at all the exchanges and everything. And he's just continued to grow and take on more, and now he's just leading at a high level, and they're making a lot of awesome things happen there in New Braunfels. So, Cody, we're so glad to have you, man. Thank you for taking some time to be with us.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, we consider you Tree of Life folks family. Like we're just so grateful for what you do. So I'm looking forward to getting into it. But Mike, do you want to go ahead and welcome the new churches?
Yeah, let's go. We're always so thankful and excited to have new churches come on, new pastors and leaders from across the country and even the world. And so since our last webinar 2 weeks ago, we've had a lot of people join the network, and we just want to welcome you guys and say welcome to the family. They're going to put them up on the screen here, and we just want to give you a shout out. So I don't know if we want to read all of them or if Pastor Jorge, there's Scott, we know Scott, Pastor Warren, Pastor Michael, Pastor Damon, Pastor Dan, Pastor Roger, Pastor Christopher, Pastor Miranda, Kenny, John, Michael, Doyle, Jeremy, Brian, Daryl. We are so glad to have you guys as a part of the family. Welcome. And if you're joining us today, we just want to give you a special welcome. And we have to go through it pretty quick now because the list is growing, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, well, and we just look forward to getting to know people. And like we say, these webinars are our bi-weekly time. We look at them like a lunch appointment. And people that you totally enjoy going to lunch with, we try to bring them to you quick. And today I'm so excited because we're going to be talking about preparing for Easter. And Easter's just 6 weekends away. I know I don't have to tell you that. I know I don't have to tell you that. And I'm sure I don't have to tell the pastors watching that. But there's still enough time if you don't feel like you have a clear plan. Today's notes, as I was looking at them, I thought, man, I remember when I was, in my earlier years and just searching for how to do Easter bigger. Some people are going to get some really good ideas today, but even if you've been doing Easter for a long time, there were some real good tweaks that what I'd call low investment, high impact tweaks, that were coming to my heart as I was looking at this. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it. We're going to talk about 5 things, I think. Is that right? 5 things?
So Cody has some really good stuff that we're going to kind of spend some time in and we're going to go in and out of. But 5 things that he's going to share with us. And so, Cody, if you want to kind of take it away and get us started, I'd love to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you guys so much. We do consider you family as well. And I know on behalf of my senior pastor, Pastor Don Duncan, we're so grateful for all that you do for the local church. And this session to me is great because actually at the very first exchange I ever came to, Pastor Jim, you taught a message called Planning That Produces Life and Peace. And I'm not sure how much life and peace I had in my life at that time because I was so bad at planning. And so that really changed a lot for me just to hear that phrase and to understand that planning could create a sense of peace inside of me. And honestly, this is going to sound so obvious, but I think we have to start with the spiritual foundation as we prep for Easter. Something our pastor says all the time is that nothing happens without prayer. And he often tells us right before a huge moment like Easter, you'll hear him say, our level of preparation is an expression of our faith. And I really think that prayer can be, that preparation can be prophetic. And what I mean by that is you see Moses go up the mountain. And when he comes down from the mountain in his time with the Lord, he has a plan to build a tabernacle. And at Easter, really, we're trying to build the local church and build God's kingdom. And I believe it starts in the place of prayer. Before we plan, we pray and we get God's heart on it. And so I just would ask the question, to all of us, especially in the creative world, how many lost people are you believing for God to bring to your church this Easter?
Good.
Are you locked in with your pastor? Are you believing for that? And are you praying in that direction?
That's really good. And, I know, Michael, you may talk about some of this, but I just want to say a couple of things about what you said. Number one is we prayer walk every neighborhood within Victoria heading up into Easter. And we didn't do that, but we do have to give our people the opportunity to be in partnership with what God's put in our heart. And it shouldn't just be something we come up with because we heard another church say it. I think some of my best memories are one time we were getting ready for an Easter, and I was real sensitive to my creative director because she was just in the midst of a lot and she was in a busy season. And I woke up one morning and I had this creative idea about doing a Friday service and a Sunday service and using the story of Joseph of Arimathea. So I was like, oh, do I call her with this? And then I did call her and I said, hey, how you doing? And she said, before you go any further, Joseph of Arimathea, what does that mean? And she literally heard that in her heart. So it's really cool when you pray and you know that you're doing something special. And that birthed Good Friday services in our churches, which are now so well attended in our city.
Right, for sure. And I don't know about you, Cody, I'm sure, but Easter can be a lot, right? There's a lot that's going into it, a lot of preparation, a lot of work, and we want to make sure God's hand's in it, right? When God's hand is on it, when God's hand is in it, the strength, the favor, the productivity, the grace that we have, it's just different because it's not something we're forcing, right? So I've kind of learned that, man, it's so much better to, from the start, make sure we're in tune with what God's wanting to do than it is to just get going and then ask Him to bless it as we're going, right? So, man, I wholeheartedly just agree with that prayer and being in tune with what God's wanting to do through us as creatives and through a church is such an important place to start.
Yeah, I think too, when you look at it, when you get into the most difficult seasons in ministry, let's say it's the week of and everything goes wrong with the plan that you made, the prayer was the preparation for that moment, to keep your joy up, to keep your why in front of you, and to know who you're really doing it for.
Right.
That's good.
That's awesome.
That's really good. So where do you guys go next? So you've prayed. Tell me what you're doing at Tree of Life this Easter. What has God put on you guys' heart?
Yeah, so the way that that works, and that's actually kind of where I'm going, is setting your own deadlines. And so for me, I'm really intentional about starting with meeting with my senior pastor, and we'll get more to that in just a moment. But as a church, what we're kind of seeing is numbers are picking up, but what's been really on our pastor's heart is we don't want to say, okay, well, the numbers are great because it's January, February, but they'll trail off because just like a gym or any other place, people commit for a while. So honestly, as we lead into Easter, our heart and our mission is to keep those people engaged through Easter. And then really from there, you'll kind of see it begin to pick up as they invite other people. We've been doing a huge serving push. So some of it for us is not just focusing on the day of, but we're focusing into the lead up to that. These people that have come back from January, what are they going to do? How are they going to get involved and make Easter great? But for me, I think the deadline piece, as we look into that, I sit down, like I said, with my pastor, and we just talk. And I kind of let him say, here's what I'm looking forward to. So he has specific visions. As he and I talk, we're a very diverse church. And so we've already talked about how are we going to incorporate, we're in an area that's a huge area for country music. So we have some country sounding music that he wants in the service. But then we have a significant portion of our church that is from minority communities. And so we'll do a lot of gospel, we'll do a lot of Spanish. We're a family church, so we'll make sure that we have our student ministries as part of our worship team in some way that day. So he and I kind of sit together and we dream about what does it need to look like to fit the demographic of our church. And we do a Good Friday service just like you guys do. And then we do a special needs egg hunt the next day. And then we do a Sunday service, and it's a good time. So we're excited about it.
That's really good. And, I love your thought about January and because I think everybody, at least most people I know, had a pretty good bump this January. It's like last year in Texas anyway, COVID was hitting us really strong in January. So this year, we got a big bump even from where things were in October. But having those people get involved in things like the special needs egg hunt and the things that you guys are planning or the prayer walks or whatever, it makes them a partner in what's going on. And the other thing is what we found is we've done full-blown AD 33. We've had things where we've had, I think the most we've ever had was 10% of the county out to one event. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of time, and they come and go, and you ask yourself, is it worth it? And I get that. Right. But I'm going to tell you why sometimes it's worth it. It's not worth it every year for us, but it is worth it sometime if God speaks about it. But regardless, it's good to have a lot of people involved in Easter, and I'll tell you why. When they're involved, their relatives come. Right. And as a pastor, it gives you a shot to talk to their relatives. How many times you're going to even get 5 or 10 minutes to talk to their relatives, but you have that opportunity at Easter.
Right, exactly. And I think it's so good to be aware of that. Like you're saying, it's such a good opportunity both to get people connected in the way that you program service, and just Easter's a time where you're going to get a lot of people in the doors that you're not always going to get. There's an openness to coming to church and being with family. And so,
and we started with 80 families. So just to share some of our early stories, we started a choir and our platform broke. I mean, we didn't think, okay, as a platform engineer to handle all these people getting excited, and it wasn't, so it broke in a service. Then we had one time where we did a deal, and Moses was up on the mountain, and we were so proud of this mountain that we had. It was the first time we used a fog machine. And when he started to talk, he inhaled the fog, and he started coughing so bad, we had to go back and start over. And I just tell pastors, don't be afraid of that kind of stuff, because sometimes even when our actors were bad, people who were good actors then signed up to take somebody's place. And it's just good to, and I love that you started with prayer, Cody, because without him, we can do nothing. Right. Nothing. If we ever lose that, God won't be with us. But once he does it, once God says, this is what I want to do, I think it's helpful sometimes to hear from people that maybe God had spoken to years before us, and to hear, okay, why could God be saying that? And even if it's as simple as having your children do a special choir special to show your family church, if they do one Easter song, you know what? They're going to be grandmas, they're going to be aunts and uncles, they're going to be people that you have a chance to talk to that you wouldn't have a chance to on Easter.
Right, right. So I think it's good that he went for prayer, and now we're talking about deadlines, because all these can become intentions, but to make them reality, we gotta set some deadlines and get some things in order. So Cody, you want to talk a little bit about step 2 here?
Yeah, I think creative people are legendary for having a wonderful vision and not many legs to the plan
Dreamers.
itself.
Yeah.
And so I love this quote, Pastor Gerald Brooks, a friend of ours. He says, "Discipline is the gift you give yourself, and deadlines are the gift others give you when you lack discipline." And so trying to come in and just, hey, I sit down and I make an audit. Here's everything that I need to figure out before this event happens. And then what I've kind of learned to do through trial and error and making mistakes and asking my team forgiveness and help is go to them and say, hey, when do you need these things to be done so that you can make your portion excellent? And so don't just make these deadlines in a vacuum and make these decisions in a bubble. Make sure that you incorporate your team and go, when do we need to have this by so that every piece of this plan will actually work, and make that audit together. Here's everything that has to happen for the service. And then I keep it, we use Planner from Microsoft, but we keep it in an online checklist, basically, so everybody can see what's needed at each time. And makes communication simple. You're not searching through email threads or anything like that. You're just looking at it together.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, things like that, and we use Basecamp, and there's a lot of good project management tools that are so helpful. And there's really, it's a bummer to have all this great vision but not to have the time or the resources or that to pull it off when you could have, right? And one thing we do, when we come together, we do this for all of our major events, especially Easter being one of those, is we'll bring the team together and we'll make it a good time. Because sometimes with creatives, like you said, we're notorious for maybe not wanting to plan, not wanting to do the hard work sometimes because we're dreaming but getting everybody together and making it a good time. Maybe get off site for a couple hours, maybe do it and then all go to lunch together, get some coffee, and just start talking about, Easter, what it is we want to accomplish. Here are some ideas. And as we're talking and we have everyone involved, then we're able to catch a lot of what you're talking about, right? Like your tech guys are going to have some thoughts about this. Your, lighting, these different guys, and we're getting input. Now I will say this, anytime you're going to bring a lot of people together, your meeting leadership skills are important. Because you're going to have certain people who are going to find, problems very fast, maybe stifle creativity.
Good.
So, make sure you have, at least for us, we have to make sure, okay, this is idea phase, ideation, creation.
Yeah.
No bad ideas. Let's not talk about problems right now. Let's get some ideas. And then we'll work our way through that. We'll come to the end of that and we'll say, all right, let's key in on some ideas that we really feel or some that we want to really look at seriously, and we'll start pulling those out. And then we start working down to, all right, let's identify some potential issues here. Let's talk about how we can accomplish this. But to your point, man, involving your team early enough so that you're not having issues, as it's getting late and now it's going to be hard to pull it off, I think is super important.
Yeah, we had issues again in the early days, Cody, where they wrote a production and it was like twice as many microphones as we had. And then it was like, okay, we have this many weeks, where are we going to find them?
Yeah.
But there's two things that when you're talking I've found helpful. One is we've had leaders that sometimes their idea of a timeline was telling you when you had to have something due. But the key word you used to me was together. When you create that document and you're doing it together, and everybody has to sign off on the timeline and say, yeah, I can do my part,
right,
and I can make this happen. I think that's something that's real important. And the other thing for us is I come in and watch things from time to time, and I'll meet with the team afterwards. And one of the things, I'm not a creative like you guys. I'm maybe a little creative, but not as creative. But I think there has to come a point with creatives where you almost make a rule where you say, okay, if you're going to bring up something creative, it has to be doable at this point.
Yeah.
Because I would sit in meetings early and I would just hear people, their creative gift was just going off, and sometimes they were ignoring details and deadlines at the same
Right.
time. And you really do have to manage that.
And I think creativity thrives within boundaries oftentimes. So if
Yeah.
you put a limit on yourself of like, all right, we're not going to keep making tweaks. We're not going to keep making changes. That's a great new idea, but this is what we're doing, or this is the time we have. You're a musician, so you know very well. Sometimes if you put limitations in a certain way, it pushes you to be creative. It pushes you to figure it out. So, yeah, I've definitely been part of teams where we're changing things so much that it's hard to really gain the traction you need to be at your best.
Yeah, you know, I heard somebody say one time, I think it was in the tech sector, they said an imperfect product that actually ships is better than a perfect product that never ships. And sometimes we can get this thing where this has to be so perfect, but it also has to be accomplished by Easter Sunday.
Right.
And so, you know, you kind of have to pick your battles and just know, is this really what we want to be the absolute most perfect thing? Or are we just trying to create something that's unattainable?
Yeah, and people connect with imperfection, and they just do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so. I mean, they want it to be excellent, but there's to all perfection there's a limit. I think Solomon said that, and it's really true.
He was pretty wise.
Wiser than me, that's for sure.
So Cody, we've talked about prayer. We've talked about deadlines. We're kind of somewhat segueing into number 3 here, I think, already.
Yeah. This is my favorite one. So I think there's this common misconception that if you give an artist a paintbrush, something amazing will happen. And it's really quite possible that if you give an artist a paintbrush, nothing good will happen, or something that you totally hoped wouldn't happen will happen. And I think the best way to explain it is my wife and I, we went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City one time. And I remember as a kid seeing the painting of Washington crossing the Delaware in history books. And I go to this museum and I stand in front of the painting, and I always thought it would be small. And it was actually like 28 feet wide by 12 feet tall. And then you go and you see Van Gogh's self-portrait, and his is about 1.5 feet or 2 feet, and it's a square. And what really struck me is there's no way that you could have painted Washington crossing the Delaware on that small of a canvas that Van Gogh used. And if Van Gogh tried to paint his own self-portrait on a 12 by 28 foot canvas, it would have been absurd. And I think it's really important that as artists and as creatives, we know what our boundaries are. And if we know the borders of the canvas, we're going to create something that's really beautiful, and we're probably going to create something that's actually what our senior pastor is looking for. And so I think you start with, let's get the boundaries together with our senior pastor.
Yeah, I think that's great. And when you come sell it to your senior pastor, don't act like you had the greatest idea since whatever, right?
Right.
Every time I watch the movie The Elf, I think about that when those guys bring those book proposals. When you're a lead pastor, you've been on the other side of the desk quite a bit. And you appreciate somebody who worked real hard on the canvas and doesn't try to oversell it with emotion, but they just...
Yeah.
Right. I think that's true, and I think that we've all been a part of maybe creativity at some point in our lives, where we're kind of just doing it for the idea of creativity or the idea of producing something. But really, our goal, man, is to further the vision of God's kingdom, of the house, of the church. And so having a canvas, having an understanding of that, of, you know, how does what we're doing further what we're trying to accomplish as a church, you know, I think goes a long way, and it makes all of our efforts. And I think that goes beyond what we do, doesn't it, Cody? That's really, and we'll probably talk about that later, but that's really church-wide, because the truth is what we're doing is really only a part of what's happening on Easter Sunday or Easter season, and what people will experience.
This will be...
that's what...
Go ahead,
sorry.
Cody. No, go ahead.
Well, that's one thing that I think about a lot is, you know, everything that's happening around the church on Sunday morning, on Easter, April 9th, your pastor's thinking about all of that. And so I don't expect my pastor to come to me and ask for a meeting about what he's looking for Easter Sunday. I'm going to go to him, and I already did a few weeks back, and we're going to sit down, and I schedule a meeting, and I ask him questions about the canvas, because he's thinking about what his kids ministry doing, what his youth ministry doing, what's the lobby experience look like. He's not going to schedule that meeting with me. I'm going to be proactive and take it to him.
Right. Yeah. You know, this is going to be my 34th Easter, and along the lines of what you're talking about with the canvas and everybody realizing how important they are as a part of that canvas. And not even just everybody within the creative ministries, but everybody within the ministries as you just described. Because I can tell you that over 34 Easters, every time I'd get in my car and I thought, man, I nailed that sermon. Everything was so good. I think there's going to be a lot of people back next week. And then I'd come and where are they?
Right.
You know? And then there are other times I thought, oh, I wish I'd done better today, you know, over 34 years. And you come back and there's still people there. And what's that tell us? It tells us that the culture of people's life is the biggest thing that we're really aiming at whenever Easter comes. And so what are we doing? And I know, Michael, I appreciate what you guys do, because you do a lot to address the audience that's here. And you try not to make it to where it's people that are in the stands watching us do what we do every week since it's Easter.
Right.
But you try to really help them see that, hey, you know, church might be something you want to think about.
Right, yeah, so you know you're going to have a different crowd on Easter, right? You're going to have the creasters, you're going to have people who maybe don't understand as much about church, about you, about Jesus. So you want to be sensitive to that, you know, in the way that you talk, in the way that the things that you do. But we've also, you know, for us, and it may be different for different people, but we've also kind of just realized, you know, when we do these big events like you know, 80-33 that brought 10% of the county, we're not doing that on Easter Sunday.
No, we're
normally doing that before.
Yeah, we do that Palm
Sunday. Kind
Sunday.
of feeding. But we've really enjoyed, you know, Easter being something that, yes, it's a little ramped up. Yes, it's, you know, with those people in mind, but it's a church service. You know, because we don't want people to just come to Easter and think, oh man, that was an awesome big event. Can't wait till they do their next one. We want people to come and think, oh man, Jesus is awesome. Man, I really need this kind of community. I really need church. And I think in approaching it that way, you have a better chance of realizing this isn't just an event. This is something bigger to belong to.
Yeah, the truth is we used to do at Easter. I mean, we did the same thing at Christmas, is we would do a big production, and then we noticed, well, people left, and that was pretty much
They'll
it.
be back next Easter.
Yeah, so we started doing a lot more events like pony rides this week, something else the next week, and it helped Christmas to stay stronger.
But
then we came back and rethought Easter, and that's when we switched it. But the truth is, I started out as a guy that did it wrong. So
well, I think that was kind of the thing. I think that was happening, you know, in a lot of churches, and for some that may be the way to go. But for us,
well, we were just glad people were coming.
We're coming, yeah. But it's an evangelism tool, really. You know, when you get people to an 80-33, and then to be able to invite them back to Easter, and be able to show them what church is, you know, what this place can mean to them, it works for us. You know,
You know, there's one more piece of that I think you mentioned how we used to do it. And I've been on staff at our church for 13 years on March 1st. And so I've been on staff long enough to know how we used to do it. And so part of the way I frame the canvas every year is I'll go to our senior pastor and I ask questions like, hey, how do you want people to feel when they leave?
Yeah.
What do you want them to walk away with? What style do you want? What's the timeline of the service? Because what he wanted 5 years ago may not be what he wants today. And so if you've been there a long time, you've got to be proactive in asking, what is the new thing that we need to do? And if you're new to the role, the position, wherever you're at, you kind of have to go in and say, what are the people used to, and how can I honor that? There's this kind of a dance where it's like we honor what we've done in the past, but we're learning a new thing at all times.
That's good.
That's really good. Well, I like this last part, so maybe we should just review a minute that it all starts with prayer, which I love. And then you set your own deadlines, but to me, with the key word being together, that you and your team come together and you form, whether it's Basecamp, Google, whatever you do it on, everybody buys in, says this looks good. You make sure that the senior pastor's on board and you have a canvas that fits what's in your heart. And then the next thing you do, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so that one is the most obvious, but probably the most difficult to do, right? We want to make sure that we're delegating and delegating well. And I think we've all been the leader who has tried to do it all on our own. But it's really striking to me, that whole piece about Mount Sinai. When Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, he has this word that he gets from the Lord about how to build the tabernacle, the house of God. But the Bible explains to us that when he comes down, he passes that on to Bezalel and Aholiab. And they're these skilled artisans. And from there, they begin disseminating all of the responsibilities to other people. So God gives a leader a dream. The leader passes it on to two other leaders who are skilled. I would think of these people, they're kind of like me or Pastor Michael. They are kind of the artisans in the house. And then they begin to kind of spread that responsibility out among the people. And I just think, how long would it have taken them to build that tabernacle if it would have just been Moses or would have just been Bezalel and Aholiab? And the people wouldn't have been as invested. And it wouldn't have been what God intended for it to be. So finding intentional ways to delegate, whether or not you're good at it, I would say this: if you're bad at delegating, pick one simple thing this year that you're going to delegate. It could be, I want you, someone on your team, to pick what our dress code's going to be for this service and email it out to everybody. If that's the best you can be at delegating, start there and just watch as some stuff begins to lift off of your plate. And then also more things begin to be accomplished, and probably a better product as a whole, because we've released something that we needed to release to someone else.
Yeah, that's so good. This is my wife and I's joke, but I've said to her many times, I've looked at things people done, and I've said, you know how long that would have taken me? She said, how long? I said, a lifetime. And I couldn't have done it. Because I look at it, and people who don't have that gift, it's just natural to people who have the gift, but people who don't have it, I look up here and I think, I couldn't do that in a lifetime. And it's so powerful. The thought I have when you were talking is it's hard work to delegate. And over the years, I grew up in Pittsburgh, it was kind of blue collar. It was people came and did something that was boring, and they didn't do it because they loved their job. They did it because they loved their family, and it provided the bills, and they loved what they did at night, and they loved what they did on the weekends. And so in that setting, you can just kind of dump something on somebody, right? Because it's a simple job, and I love what I get to have because of that. That's like the first word you could use when you talk about delegate. The second word I think you can use is to delegate. And I think when you delegate something that's important, you have to make sure people have the skills to do it. And there are some people that are just sitting there with skills. And of course, I think probably the best book to start with if you're trying to learn the power of this is Tommy Barnett's book, The Miracles in Your House. Because he talks about how pastors are praying for all these things, but it's right in front of you. The answer is right in your house. That God put somebody with a passion for outreach, with a passion for the homeless, with a passion for the arts. We just have to get our flywheels so that we're not so busy preaching and teaching and doing what we do that we're not in that whole delegate process. But as millennials have come up, I've found that there's a third word that I'd use when it comes to the whole delegation process. And that is that you don't just dump, and sometimes you don't even just delegate, but you develop people. Because people that didn't have fathers that really, nurtured them like they should have, or even parents that wanted to, but it's a real busy society. To go the second step, and we're working on that as an organization now. We haven't mastered any of it. Honestly, about the time you think you mastered it, you realize that you slipped, and I need to get better at this again. So I think that what you're saying is so important. The other thing is, I don't know about you guys, Cody, but I like our artists to have devotional times. And I know you can feel like, man, we just don't have time for this. But the reality is people have spiritual issues that you don't want somebody on the team correcting them harshly because it's never been dealt with. You want to be talking about the things that the Bible says about how you honor authority and how honest communication happens and the things that happen that really, really do cause community to thrive.
Right. That's good.
I think.
Go ahead, Cody.
I think you, when you look at that, you're looking at, okay, I'm not going to teach you how to do a job. I'm going to teach you why I think the way I think. And that's the real hard work. It's not, I don't want you to do it this way, I want you to do it this way. It's, here's why we think the way that we do in this culture, in this church. And if you can teach them, my goal really is to say, here's why I think the way I do as the worship pastor. And I think that way because I'm doing my best to understand the way our senior pastor thinks. And if you begin to kind of push that down the line, then what you've got is people who don't have to be told every decision they need to make, but they've been developed, as you said, to understand how the organization thinks to get to a preferred destination. And that's when you actually unlock creativity, because then you're saying, we need to go here. You know what our values and our culture are, why we do what we do. Now you figure out how to do it, and you unlock the potential in the organization as a whole.
That's good. You know, I think it doesn't take a lot of work to dump on somebody. It takes work to delegate, but not as much as develop. Develop takes the most work, but up front, especially, Cody, to your point, because if you delegate and that's all you do, they're going to continue to come back with questions and you're going to have to go task. But if you develop people, you're, like you said, you're empowering people that in the long run is going to pay off huge dividends. And I think of 1 Corinthians 12, you know, where he talks about gifts in the body. And I've found with people that, man, sometimes, especially the people who struggle, and maybe we all have at times, but with recruiting and asking people to be involved, is we just lose sight of the fact that it's such an opportunity, that people have gifts that God wants to use, that people were placed in the body for a reason. And really what we're doing is we're helping them tap into that. We're not asking them to do this for us. We're not asking them, but we're trying to unleash potential in their life. We're trying to help them find opportunity to use their gifts. And so, you know, I think as leaders, it's important that we're familiar with, you know, that we say it that way, that we treat it that way, that we talk to people that way. Because if we're asking, hey, will you do this for me? We're kind of subconsciously building a culture that, hey, we're just kind of helping each other out. But man, if we're talking to people about opportunity and casting vision and saying, this is what we're wanting to accomplish this Easter and this is how you can help, you know, or, man, I see this gift in you and I think this is how God could use it. All of a sudden, it's just a different kind of ask, and it's a different kind of team. It's team, not task. And that's one thing we say around here. Think team, not task.
Yeah. Well, we just did it for Jesus back in my day. You know
And that's good too. There's goodness there.
We were coming out of all these traditional churches, and we were just glad it was going
There's
on.
a reason,
But that's why leadership's evolutionary, you know. And I was the young guy, and like David said, I was young, and now I don't like to say I'm old yet, but he said, and I've never seen the righteous forsaken. So it's what you guys are saying. It's what needs to happen now. And it's the church that needs to be developed for people, because thank God, I mean, every pastor's thankful for the people of the older generation that just show up and do it and don't have a lot of feelings about it necessarily, but it's not the best.
But doing it for Jesus is the core, right? Even no matter what
it is the
generation.
core, and honestly, what you're doing is better. Even if somebody has the heart that they're really faithful, don't overlook that person. Make sure they get the affirmation and the whatever's needed in their heart.
Mm-hmm. But people want to be a part of purpose.
Oh, I'm so sorry. If I could just add something to that, I think when I look at that story of the tabernacle, you know, everybody in the congregation of Israel at that time had a role. So when they build this tabernacle, there's artisans that are building it, but everybody is bringing an offering so that it can be built. They're bringing jewelry, all these things that they can use to make the tabernacle. And then you've got Moses on the other side, and he has his leaders who are helping him judge particular issues and cases amongst the people. And there's a role. And if I could say one thing to worship artists and creatives, it's step back and see the big picture of the entire church.
That's good.
That there are people who gave the resource for us to do this service. There are other leaders in other roles who are simultaneously working just as hard as we are. And we're looking at this whole thing and saying, what I'm doing is a part of the experience, but none of this works if we don't all do it together.
That's good. You know, and this is my last thing, but I was reading that what you're referring to in the Bible this year, and I never saw it before, and that is there were also people that were skilled to teach others the arts. And I thought, isn't that something? Because back in the day, sometimes we'd have somebody who was really good at building the set, and we'd want him to lead artists or to teach others, but he didn't have that gift, and it would just frustrate him if we asked him to do it. So finding the people that can teach and multiply it, that's a good thing to look forward to.
You know, one way that we found too that we've been able to involve people and invite them into the Easter kind of push is simply encouraging them to invite people, to take ownership of, I mean, the best marketing in your church is your people, word of mouth. And we do things like door hangers and these different distributions. And so even starting there, beyond kind of like what you said, Cody, it's not just about the service. It's not just about what we're doing. We're talking about creativity a lot today, but even give your people something that they can grab onto and take ownership with. Oh, I'm going to invite people to Easter. Oh, I'm going to be part of that, getting people here. All of that makes a difference, and all that attaches people to purpose and even further attaches them to what's going to be happening during your Easter season.
That's good.
And it helps get people in the door, right? Evangelism. So
Yeah.
Well, Cody, we appreciate you doing this work to help other churches, including us. So,
yeah, one more.
all right, I think we got one more to go, huh?
Sure, yeah. The only last thing I would say is just do an after-action review. We're in a military community, and after one of our services, this retired Air Force woman came up to me and said, in your after-action review, I think we should put this. And she's on our team, and I was like, well, to be honest, we don't do that. And everybody has some form of like plus delta or wins and losses. But the after-action review, I'm a huge fan of, and it's a Department of Defense thing primarily. But we ask 4 questions. What did we intend? What happened? What did we learn? And what will we do differently? And the beauty of this has been, I just go to that file in my computer next Easter as we're preparing, and I look and I go, oh, yep, there's every mistake I made last year. Or there's everything we did that worked really well. And now we have this starting point that's so much better than the year before. And I would take this a step further. I'd say do it with your team, because they're going to catch some things that you're not going to catch. And then ask your pastor. You don't have to ask him all those questions, but you can say, hey, what did you love and what would you like to see different? And just write it down, especially if you're creative. You're going to do 100+ services this year. If you're like me, you're probably a little bit distracted anyways. That's why you're so creative. Get it on paper, and then you can look at it as you prep for the next service and make that even better. And really what you're doing is you're automating a process to take a lot of the mental work out of it so that you can create even better.
That's good. I think that's very important. Like you said, it's in the moment is important too, or like close enough to the moment, is important too, because I can't remember how I felt 2 weeks ago sometimes, or even a week ago.
Especially when you're raising kids.
Right. You sleep on it, and then you start to lose it slowly. So I think that, to your point, get that on the calendar pretty quick with your team after each event. And one thing that as you were talking about that, I was thinking is kind of also setting your goals, because you said, what did we intend? I think that's really important, even just church-wide. That just a reminder that, and we've said this a few times, Easter's not just about the service. We can have a great service and produce a great service, but that's not necessarily our intention. Our intention is to help people know Jesus, help people to become a part of the community and those kind of things. So I know one thing, Dad, that you were really intentional with over the last several years is thinking beyond that. And we're talking about assimilation. How do we get people to second, third, fourth time visits? How do we, salvation numbers, registering people for baptisms, those kinds of things, I think are all important when you're talking about your intentions for Easter as a team, and creatives, the service we put on, that should all feed that and play to that.
Yeah, I'm going to say Cody's questions again, because I think they're really good. So I'm going to say it in case somebody wanted to get them, and you're like I am, your fingers don't work as fast as the young people. But what did we intend? What happened? What did we learn from it? And what will we do different next time? And baptisms, for instance, is one of those things you can learn. Man, we left that on the table this year. There was a lot more people that could have followed the Lord in baptism than what did. And here's one thing that I just, this is probably years talking, and for people that are maybe your skills are more in the execution realm than maybe even the creative realm. It's just so important when people work that hard that you take time to celebrate. And I really like what I heard, and that is that if you're going to develop people, you need to make it a habit that there's going to be 5 positives for every one thing that you got to talk through. Because people work hard and they're bringing so much to the table, And if all you do is come back and say, okay, how do we get better at this? You just get tired of that after a while. Sure. But the way he's approaching it here is, okay, what did we intend? What happened? And I think of James 5 where it says, confess your faults to one another and pray for one another that you might be healed. Why don't most people confess their faults? Because you're going to hammer me.
Yeah.
You're going to go right to the accountability phase once I tell you that. But really good relationships are relationships where it's easy to talk about how we can get better because we're honoring the good so much. And I feel so secure in this relationship that I can say, yeah, you know, the way I was raised, I've got this part of that I carried into this. I don't want to be that kind of parent, so help me with that, you know. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you go through this after phase, just make sure that you celebrate a lot and then start with your own things. Man, this year, I just want to start with what I wish I had done better because it really encourages you when you hear somebody confess their faults when their faults are affecting you, right? Yeah. And sure. But I think that's a real critical and a great fifth step.
I agree. I think of the deposits and kind of invest, like when you're gonna, whether it's give someone criticism, if you're gonna ask someone for something, like how much you've deposited and invested into them matters. So how often you're investing, both celebrating the wins, or when it's time to call them to something more, do you have that kind of investment in them? Do you have the deposit there that you're able to kind of make that withdrawal, to use it? Yeah, I don't know a better way to say that, but I think it's so important, and I think it's part of culture setting. I think that gets through the team. So, you know, you want people to replicate that. You don't want people just walking around looking for every negative thing they can find or everything that went wrong. You want a culture where we're celebrating and enjoying what we get to be a part of, what we're doing, and then we are getting better, you know? So I think that's very important. So I've seen you do that, be really intentional about getting us there as a team.
Well, it's just a lot of work. I think we can all point at things we wanted to do better and things we can just say, thank God, you know? And that's why we do this, because iron sharpens iron and it helps us all to be better.
Yeah, but I love those 4 questions. That's really helpful.
I do too. I love them a lot. And I just want to thank Cody again for doing the hard work to give us a canvas today to talk through this as we're all preparing for our Easter service. And I'm going to let you have the last word. You can say anything you want. Maybe pray for everybody. We'll let everybody go because I really never like to go over an hour, and about 50 minutes is perfect. And it looks like we're right about that time. So let me just say this, that in 2 weeks we're going to have Pastor DJ, and I hope I say his last name right. Is it Rob? R-A-B-E? Yeah, I didn't know if I... Robbie. Okay, Pastor DJ. I was so impressed by him at the conference. The things he's doing for the homeless, the things he's doing on the outreach side, a very entrepreneurial guy. And he's going to be with us. And what he's going to talk about is going to be so important because he's going to talk about meeting needs and... Reaching people because of it. And the reason that it works is, quite frankly, as much as we've done productions, Jesus said that when people see our good works, they'll glorify our Father in heaven. And that word good means intrinsically good, that you have a good heart, that you really care about people. And if you want to know what opens up a community to the gospel, even more than musical dramas and all that kind of, although every gift's important, right? But when people see people with a good heart, even in our productions, we don't want our people to love performing. We want them to love the people they're performing for, right? We don't want our preachers to love preaching. We want them to love the people that they're teaching the gospel to. And man, he's doing some very, very, I don't know what word. Creative, but just practical too. And he's just very entrepreneurial. So you're going to enjoy hearing him next week, and we'll look forward to hosting him in a couple of weeks.
So that'll be 2 weeks from today. Yeah. Same time.
Yep. So Cody, any last words? And then would you pray?
Yes, sir, absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for allowing us to be a part. I just want to say to every creative who is watching this today that you're valuable and what you're doing in the local church matters. It matters more than you know. And the problem with King Saul was that he didn't know quite how valuable he was in the kingdom of God.
Oh, that's good.
And I want you to know that your senior pastor values you. And I want you to know you've got about, like Pastor Jim said, 6 Sundays until Easter. And I'll be praying for you every day leading up to Easter and believing that God will do something amazing in your local church. So if you would, let's pray together. Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for the significant church network. I thank you for the life that it's brought to me and to the church that I serve as part of. Lord, I just pray that today, as we walk away from this, no matter our role in the local church, that we see the big picture of what you're doing. God, that we would, in the 6 Sundays leading up to Easter, have these mountaintop moments with you where we get alone like Moses did, and we get your heart for our Easter services. But Father, I pray that you'd give us the grace and the strength by your Spirit to come down the mountain and to execute it in a plan. Father, we don't want to do anything that's not your will, your way, and your timing. So help us to do that well. Help us to live out Exodus 33. We will not go unless your presence goes with us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, guys, again, thank you so much for being with us, and I appreciated the comments that I saw in the feed. I had, because you were co-hosting, I had a little more time to watch the feed, and I want to say to Gary Hart in Montana, wow, minus 10 degrees. I think it's 75 here.
Yeah.
It's way
It's hot.
different, but hey, you
Yeah.
get the ice fish. We don't get the ice fish, so sometimes I envy him that he gets the ice fish, but always so good to be together, and just pray you guys have an awesome weekend.